Welcome, everyone, to another chilling Reddit horror story. Tonight, I've got something deeply unsettling to share, something that still haunts me to this day. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare for a tale that might just keep you up at night. This happened to me. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, my family didn't have a car. We lived in a quiet town far from my ballet school, and every evening, my mom would come to pick me and my brother up. My brother had his own after-school activity, chess club, or something like that, and we'd all head home together. The town we lived in was one of those places where everyone knew each other. The streets were lined with small houses, most of them with little gardens that bloomed in the spring and summer, but were bare and lifeless in the winter months. It was one of those towns where everything seemed calm, almost too calm, like something was just waiting beneath the surface to break free. It was the middle of winter, and like most evenings, the sun had already set by the time we left the school. The sky was that strange color, a bluish-gray twilight that settled over everything, casting long shadows and a sense of unease. I remember how cold it was that evening. I could see my breath puffing out in little white clouds as we walked. My mom always bundled us up in thick coats, scarves, and gloves, but it never seemed to be enough. The cold seeped into your bones, and no matter how much you tried to pull your scarf tighter, it was never quite enough to keep you warm. Our house was about a 20-minute walk from the school, and there were two main ways to get there. One was the main road, which was longer but well lit, lined with houses and the occasional shop that stayed open late. The other was a shortcut, a narrow footpath that cut through a dense patch of forest, crossed some train tracks, and eventually led to our street. This route saved us at least 15 minutes, and we'd taken it so many times that it felt like second nature. The familiar crunch of our boots on the gravel path was comforting, a sound that signaled we were almost home. That evening, we chose the shortcut. It wasn't unusual for us to take that route. I knew every twist and turn of that path, every tree, every bend. But tonight, it felt different. The trees stood taller than I remembered, their branches twisting into strange, gnarled shapes like dark fingers reaching out for us. The winds had picked up, and it whispered through the branches, carrying a chill that bit into my skin. The air seemed heavier, like it was pressing in on us, and the shadows moved in ways they shouldn't have. As we walked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the crunch of our boots on the path and the occasional rustle of leaves. No birds, no animals, just the eerie hum of wind cutting through the trees. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching us from behind the thick trunks, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling lingered, like a shadow hanging just out of reach. We came to the train tracks, where the path split. The tracks ran straight ahead, the metal glinting in the fading light like something out of a nightmare, and the wood stretched out to the left and right. It was here, just before we crossed the tracks, that I saw something unusual. A man was lying on the ground, sprawled across an old, filthy mattress. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his face was partially obscured by the way he was lying. At first glance, it seemed like he was just sleeping, but there was something about the way he was positioned that didn't sit right with me. His limbs were stiff, as if frozen in place, and his body was oddly still. No rise and fall of his chest, no sign of movement at all. My brother, who had been walking ahead of us, noticed the man too. He tugged at my mom's arm, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. "Mom, look. There's a man over there," he said, his words echoing through the silence. My mom stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as she looked in the direction my brother had pointed. Her grip on our hands tightened, and I could feel the sudden shift in her mood. Her usual calm demeanor seemed to evaporate, replaced by something else. Something that made my heart race a little faster. At first, she didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the man. Her eyes flicked around the area, scanning the trees and the distant horizon, as if she were checking to see if anyone else was nearby. The rustling of the leaves in the wind seemed louder all of a sudden, more menacing. "Should we wake him up?" my brother asked, his voice trembling slightly. "He's really close to the tracks. What if a train comes?" My mom didn't answer immediately. She just kept looking at the man, her eyes darting nervously. Finally, she shook her head. "No," she said firmly, her voice sharp. "He's probably drunk or homeless. It's not safe for us to get involved." There was something in her tone that made me feel uneasy. It wasn't like her to be so dismissive. She was always the one who wanted to help, to make sure everyone was safe. But tonight, there was something about the man and the way she was acting that didn't make sense. My brother, still not understanding why we couldn't help, frowned. "But he might get hurt," he insisted, his voice rising with concern. My mom pulled us closer to her, her fingers tightening around our hands. "We're going home," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, my brother fell silent, though he kept glancing over his shoulder as we walked away. I couldn't stop thinking about the man either. He hadn't moved at all, not even a twitch. It was like he was frozen in place. A part of me felt like he wasn't just sleeping. A part of me felt like he was waiting for something. The rest of the walk was uneventful, but the image of that man stayed with me. His stillness, his coldness, the way he didn't react at all, it was all so wrong. I kept imagining what might have happened if we had stopped to help. What if he was in trouble? What if something had happened to him? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I pulled the covers up to my chin, staring at the ceiling, trying to push the thought of the man out of my head. But the image wouldn't leave. It kept creeping into my mind, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. I thought about what my mom had said, that he was probably drunk or homeless. But even that didn't sit right with me. There was something about the way he lay there, unmoving, like he was waiting for something or someone, and the way my mom had acted. It was like she knew something I didn't, like she was scared. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows in my room seemed darker than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I lay still, listening for any sound, anything that would reassure me that everything was okay. But there was nothing, just the silence. Then I heard it, a soft noise, barely perceptible, like the rustling of clothes. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The noise came again, closer this time. It was like someone was standing just outside my room, watching me. I forced myself to move, to get up and check. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. Just the cold, empty hallway. The next morning, my mom was unusually quiet. She didn't say much during breakfast, and when she drove us to school, she seemed distracted, her eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror every few seconds. I asked her if everything was okay, but she just smiled tightly and said she was fine. But I knew something had changed. Something wasn't right. The man in the forest, the way my mom had acted, none of it made sense. And even now, as I think back on it, I can't shake the feeling that he was waiting for us, that he wanted us to come closer, and that somehow we had narrowly escaped something we didn't understand. Even now, all these years later, I can't help but wonder, what if we had stopped to help? What if we had gotten closer to the man on that mattress? What would have happened then? The answer, I think, is one I'll never know. But I'll always carry that feeling with me, the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to walk right into it. The next day, the town was buzzing with news. A homeless man had been found dead near the train tracks. According to reports, his body had been discovered 2 nights earlier, on Sunday. The police hadn't been able to identify him immediately, but they confirmed the cause of death was due to exposure to the cold. It wasn't uncommon for homeless people to seek shelter near the tracks, but it was still a shock to everyone. The quiet, almost idyllic town had always felt safe, far removed from the dangers of the city. But now, a sense of unease had crept into the air. I felt a chill run down my spine when I heard the news. "Wait, does that mean we saw a dead man?" I asked my mom, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't stop the image of the man from flashing in my mind, his still body on the mattress, his vacant stare. My brother, ever the skeptic, shook his head. "No way," he said confidently. "We saw him yesterday, and the body was found 2 days ago. It must have been someone else." His explanation made sense, at least on the surface. After all, we hadn't been the only ones who passed by that area. People walked through there all the time. It could have been someone else, a man who just happened to look like the one in the news. Maybe he was just resting there, like so many others who had nowhere to go. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Something didn't add up. The way the man had looked, pale, unmoving, like a figure carved out of stone. There was something off about the whole encounter, and the more I thought about it, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That evening, as we walked the same route home, I found myself dreading the spot near the train tracks. The path through the woods, which I had always found peaceful, now felt ominous. The trees, once a canopy of vibrant green, seemed to close in on us. The shadows were deeper, darker than they should have been, as though they were hiding something just out of sight. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, the sound like a whisper from the unseen. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that someone was watching us. When we reached the tracks, I held my breath. The mattress was still there, just as we had left it, but the man was gone. Not a trace of him remained, as though he had never been there in the first place. I couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion and fear. If he had been alive, he would have been gone by now. But he hadn't been alive. Had he? My mom didn't say anything, but I could tell she was uneasy too. She quickened her pace, practically dragging us along. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced with a sense of urgency that only added to my growing sense of dread. We hurried home in silence, the weight of the day's events hanging over us like a cloud. But it wasn't until later, when I was lying in bed, that the questions started to swirl around in my mind. Why had we seen him? Why did it feel so real, so vivid? And why had he been there at all, if he was already dead? Years passed, and I tried to forget about the strange encounter. But the memory lingered, always just beneath the surface, like a faint echo that never quite faded. At the time, I brushed it off as a trick of the mind, my imagination running wild, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I kept trying to tell myself that it had been nothing, just a coincidence, a fluke, but I wasn't so sure anymore. One day, while cleaning up at home, I came across an old newspaper from that time. It had been buried beneath some old magazines in a drawer I hadn't touched in years. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the headline, "Homeless man found dead near train tracks." I felt the hairs on my arms stand up as I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the article. There, in black and white, was a photo of the man we had seen lying on the mattress. His face was as I remembered it, pale, gaunt, his eyes empty and hollow. The article confirmed it. He was the homeless man who had been found dead near the tracks. The same man who, according to the report, had died on Sunday night. I stared at the picture, my mind racing. How could we have seen him on Tuesday, 2 days after his death? I could feel my pulse quickening as the horrifying possibility began to sink in. Was it possible that we had seen his ghost? That the man we had passed by, the one lying motionless on the mattress, hadn't been alive at all? The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with questions. Why would his spirit linger there, so close to the spot where he had died? Was he trying to communicate something to us? Or was it simply a residual echo of his final moments? Could it have been a manifestation of his suffering, trapped in the place where he had met his end? The more I thought about it, the more confused and unsettled I became. It didn't make sense. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone else, someone who just happened to look like him. Maybe we had been mistaken about the dates. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. The feeling in my gut, the certainty that something wasn't right, refused to go away. Over the years, I've thought about that night more times than I can count. I've tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the mind, that my imagination had played a cruel joke on me. But every time I try to push it away, the memory comes rushing back, clear and vivid. The way the man had looked so still, his body almost unnaturally rigid, his eyes wide open but unseeing. It was a look that haunted me, a look that still lingers in my thoughts. And then there's the fact that the mattress disappeared not long after. I remember walking by the same spot a few days later, hoping to find some explanation, some clue that could make sense of it all. But the mattress was gone, as if it had never been there. It was as though the entire scene had been wiped away, leaving only questions behind. To this day, I can't walk past train tracks without feeling a shiver run down my spine. I've become hyper-aware of every sound around me, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of the wind. It's as if the forest, the tracks, the air itself is holding a secret, one that I'll never fully understand. I often wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar, an encounter with something they can't explain, something that lingers in their mind long after it's over. Have others seen ghosts? Or was it just me? Were there other people who walked that same path at that same time, who saw the same thing I did? Or was it something meant only for me, a strange encounter that defied logic and reason? I don't know if I'll ever get answers. The only thing I know for sure is that I can't forget. Every time I see train tracks or hear the whistle of a distant train, I'm reminded of that night. And no matter how much I try to convince myself that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light, I know deep down that what I saw was real, and the thought of that ghost, still lingering in the shadows, watching from the edges of the world, will never leave me. Thank you for listening to tonight's chilling tale. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more spine-tingling stories. And remember, stay safe, stay aware, and always trust your instincts. You never know what might be lurking, just out of sight.